All right. Hi, Adam. How are you, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So, you and I, Adam, to the audience, we haven't met, in person or anything, but we have a lot of mutuals, and we started talking on Instagram, especially before the 2024 election. And I
hmm
realized that you and I have a lot in common with the way we think, as Muslim Americans. And I really respect your viewpoints. So I really wanted to have you on the podcast. So,
Appreciate it.
of course. So the first question I have for you is, can you just please tell the audience a bit about your background? Like, just where do you go to college? What do you study? Just any like introduction stuff.
Yeah, so I graduated college a couple of years ago, but I have a degree in economics,
Hmm.
and I also did a lot of social science research, specifically regarding economics in my last couple of years of college. So that's kind of my educational background. And then when it comes to like political content creation, I've been doing that pretty consistently since early last year. So it's been like a year and a half doing that.
Nice, awesome, awesome. Yeah, and going right into that, the political content creation. Can you talk about what you do day to day and like the work you do on TikTok? Because I see your
Yeah.
TikToks like all the time. So if you can just walk the audience through that.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends really on how the algorithm is performing and what platform I want to be on. So currently, I'm focusing on live streams on TikTok where I do debates with Trump supporters and people who just disagree with me. That's kind of the main thing I'm doing. And then I also will post TikTok videos or YouTube videos covering current events, topics I'm passionate about, and I sort of have like multiple different avenues I try to keep active in
Mhm.
terms of making content.
Awesome. Well, that's great. That's great. So the next question I have, let's get right into like the meat of the conversation. So I want to get your reflections of the 2024 election. What went wrong for the Democrats, and why do you think Kamala Harris lost? Like, give me like a few reasons, and then give me like your primary reason, and then just like expand on.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that went wrong for the Democrats and a lot of things that I think went right for Trump. I think a lot of Democrats are in this sort of like state of denial where they're like, oh, it's not that Trump won, it's that we lost. So we just have to do better. But I do think that like Trump did do well. He
Right.
improved his margins across a lot of communities that people never would have thought would swing for him. He got more votes than ever in the popular vote. He got more electoral votes than ever in the electoral college.
Right.
Democrats, I think, had an issue of not distancing themselves from Biden. And the reality just was that whatever you think of Biden, the country did not like him. His
Right.
approval was in like the mid 30s.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's no good that's going to come from trying to gaslight the country into liking someone they don't like. So Kamala Harris, I think, should have done a better job of saying, I'm different from Biden. Let me criticize Biden, whether it's on his handling of Gaza, his handling of maybe some of the economic issues as well. Although I think his economic policy was actually pretty solid.
Yeah. I agree.
I do think that there's an over reliance to say that like, oh, policy wins elections. I think we've seen time and time again that policy has nothing to do with winning elections. It's entirely messaging. And
Right.
Democrats just did not have a good messaging apparatus and they didn't seem authentic, whereas Trump did.
Right, exactly. And I wanted to ask follow up on that. What do you think the Democrats did a bad job messaging to young men? Because in the
Yeah.
wake of the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk, I didn't agree with most of his views. It's not, I don't think of him as a role model, but he was someone that really appealed to young men. There are
Yeah.
people I know that went to my gym. They were apolitical before, but they love Charlie Kirk. They just
Yeah.
turned 2021, I think,
Yeah.
and they voted for Trump because of Kirk. So do you think that the Democrats did a bad job appealing to young men?
Absolutely. I think the Democrats did a bad job in general of appealing to younger people, probably under the age of 30. Now, I do believe that still younger women did vote Democrat and younger men switched over pretty heavily to the Republican Party. I believe it's like, I think 50 something or 60 something percent of men that vote Republican that are like around the ages of 18 to 25, which is a pretty insane number if you compare it even to like the 2020 election. Massive swing. I think that it's not just Charlie Kirk, it's this entire social media ecosystem that is like designed towards appealing to young men, whether it's Charlie Kirk, the Joe Rogan podcast, the Andrew Schultz Flagrant podcast. You
Mhm.
have people even that are, I think, much more dangerous than Charlie Kirk, like Nick Fuentes.
Oh yeah, for
There are a lot of these influencers who are very good at having this kind of like, oh, I'm just talking shit. This is just chill
sure.
vibes. We're just talking about what's going on.
Yeah,
And they
yeah,
don't come across as patronizing or obsessed with these sort of like social structures and all these things that I think the left talks about in ways that don't appeal to the average person.
mhm,
Charlie Kirk's main appeal, like you were saying, is like it doesn't matter if you're political or apolitical. He had a way of communicating with you to make you feel like you had a stake in what he was talking about, and that
right, right, yeah,
and he's a really good thing where he's like, the most convincing way or the most effective way to convince someone of something is to make them think they already agree with you. And Charlie Kirk was really good at just saying, this is obvious. This is just common sense. This is just obviously you have to have borders. You have to have a country. You have to have law and order. They frame these things in such an obvious way that young men who predominantly don't really pay attention to politics were sort of like attracted to it, and more of like, I think, a cultural level than a political level.
Absolutely. That's really well said. So, yeah, I think what I really like is that actually Gavin Newsom, someone that has a good chance of becoming the next nominee, he's talking a lot about like young men. I think that's good. And I think that if you do that, you can win back a lot of these young men. The Democrats cannot ignore that. And that's very important. So the next question, I'm going to get more into like specifically on the 2028 Democratic primary more in this conversation, but let me go to the next question I had. I want you to talk to me about Joe Biden versus Kamala Harris's approach to Gaza. What was similar and what was different, and like what are, just give me your full thoughts on it.
So it's hard to fully know what the differences would be, because as vice president, Kamala Harris was never going to fully express whatever differences they might have had. And it's also hard to know what the atmosphere was like within the administration, and like how much autonomy or how much of a voice she had when making these decisions. It does seem to be the case that Biden is like ideologically pretty Zionist, in the sense that like he still has this view that a lot of Americans had from like the late 20th century, early 21st century, of like, we have to stand with Israel. It's this one democracy in the Middle East. It's our one ally. And that's like the only lens through which they're able to view Israel. And they have a complete blind spot on the genocide that's going on right now. And even before what happened recently, the like repeated sabotage of peace deals by Netanyahu's far right government, and the complete disenfranchisement of the Palestinian people since all the way since like the late 1800s, honestly. I think Kamala Harris, I mean, there's some reporting that she tried to push Biden to be a little bit more considerate of the Palestinian people. Now, it's hard to know what exactly it means to push someone to do that. Was this like a suggestion? Was she fighting hard for it? I do think there's reason to believe that she would have been better than Biden on Gaza. How much better, I think, is pretty hard to know.
Exactly.
And there is also just the added issue of like, I mean, as bad as Trump is on Gaza, I think Biden still does deserve like a lot of criticism in regards to his handling of the Gaza situation, and the complete naivete that he showed when dealing with Netanyahu, where he thought like, oh, this is my buddy, this is my friend, I can just kind of like tell him, hey, can you pretty please stop killing people in Gaza, and he's going to listen to me. That strategy sort of was never going to work. And I think that the main word I would use to describe Biden's approach towards Gaza and Israel was weakness.
Exactly. Yeah. I feel like, but yeah, exactly. I think Harris went in a little bit more regarding the humanitarian crisis. But I think that, you know, the pro-Palestinian protesters had a point. And all they said is, why don't you support an arms embargo? So Bernie Sanders, he proposed in the Senate like a offensive weapons embargo. Because if there's a genocide happening, it's obviously happening with our weapons. So if you stop sending the weapons, then there's no tool to do the genocide, right? So that's just common sense. So I feel like Kamala Harris could have been a little more firm. And in that sense, she is complicit in genocide. For me, it was like, to an extent, obviously Trump was worse.
Yeah,
I think that for me, this vote between Harris and Trump was purely almost all like a vote against Donald Trump, because look what Trump is doing right now. I don't even have to go into it, right? I just had to get Trump out of office. But had it been like Kamala Harris versus Mitt Romney, who knows? Maybe I would have voted for Jill Stein. I don't know. So, you know, so the people who didn't vote for her because of Gaza, they have a point. It's not like they're just being
right. And that's why I make a point of sort of saying that, like, while I think it was the wrong move to not vote or to vote for third party, I'm never going to like personally attack someone who has like family in Gaza or the West Bank, because on an emotional level, like, I can understand that you're not going to be thinking like going policy by policy and comparing like who's materially better. There is like just a certain visceral reaction you're going to have to that. But I will say that like it's heartening to see that I think the Democratic Party is movable on this issue, because just recently you had, I believe, 27 or 28 Senate Democrats voting to block arms to Israel. Now, is that enough? Absolutely not. You need every single Democrat voting. It's still insufficient, but you could not imagine 5 or 10 years ago that any substantial number of Democrats in the Senate would actually be voting in this way. And I think it's a testament to the fact that the way you change this approach towards Gaza is not by abandoning and attacking the Democratic Party. It's by entering the Democratic Party and trying to change its stance from within.
Exactly. I agree, because it was going to be either Harris or Trump. So if you voted for Jill Stein, that just made it more likely for Trump to win. And even on Gaza specifically, he's even worse. He's saying, I want to turn Gaza into like a parking lot or resort. Yeah. And when you say all those things, then obviously he's worse. And you had to look at the situation. It's going to be either Harris or Trump, and you have to pick lesser of two evils. And now we're stuck with Donald Trump. So I feel like there should have been more urgency. I honestly wish that there wasn't a need for this much urgency. I wish it was like 2008 Obama versus McCain, 2012 Obama versus Romney. Like if Obama lost, I'd be disappointed, but I can live with McCain. I can live with Romney because there's some civility, and they're not, just crazy the dictatorship, authoritarianism, fascism.
Right.
So
it shows how far the country's come that someone like Mitt Romney, who I would never vote for, seems like actually not horrible compared to the current president. Yeah,
exactly. It's crazy because I've voted in 3 presidential elections now. So when I was 18, that was 2016, and Trump has been on the ballot all 3 elections.
Yeah,
it's crazy, right? So it's like, when is this guy gonna get off? And who knows? What if he's on the 2028 ballot? Because the way that the country is moving, hopefully he's on the ballot in 2028, and it's hopefully this fascism, dictatorship, authoritarianism stuff starts to come to an end. So then my next question for you is, who do you support in the 2028 Democratic primary? And I wanted to actually ask you to rank these 5 candidates from best to worst and then expand on that. Kamala Harris, AOC, Gavin Newsom, Pete Buttigieg, and Andy Beshear.
I would put probably AOC. I'd put Andy Beshear at number 1. Then I'd put AOC. Then Buttigieg, then Newsom, then Harris.
Okay. And then I'd say my rank would be Gavin Newsom 1, number 2 probably Andy Beshear, 3 AOC, 4 Harris, and then 5 Buttigieg. Actually, no, 4 Buttigieg, 5 Harris. Sure. And I want to get your thoughts as why do you have that ranking?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Newsom's messaging lately. I think he's doing a really good job, especially using his power as governor to fight back, like introducing the bill, forcing ICE agents that they can't wear masks and hide their identities when they're roaming around in public, snatching people off the streets. I think that's like a good use of power, because a lot of Democrats right now are just grandstanding, but not actually taking action to fight back. So in that respect, I like Newsom. I just don't think I would like his governance a lot. He doesn't seem like, he's done things as governor that I think are good. I think he's also done a lot of things, especially surrounding COVID, that probably did hurt his reputation and his credibility that people are going to bring up in a general election. I think Beshear, just having a Kentucky Democrat, sounds like such a unique lane to occupy, which I think could appeal to a lot of these states that otherwise would not consider voting Democrat. In terms of policy, I think I'd probably like AOC and Buttigieg the most. But with Buttigieg, I think he has a pretty weak stance on Gaza. And I think that he sometimes is a little bit too nice and doesn't have that sort of like fighter energy that someone like Newsom or AOC sometimes has. And honestly, out of all 5 of those, I don't think any of them would be in my top ranking for who I would want to see as the nominee. I think if I was to pick one person who I think is like really the future of the Democratic Party, it would be James Talarico from Texas.
I knew you'd say that. I had a feeling.
Yeah. He's amazing. He's extremely well-spoken, very intelligent. You can tell when you watch him speak that he's in politics for the right reasons. He's not getting paid to do this. He's a state representative that makes like a few $1,000s a year. He's now running for Texas Senate, which I think he'll win that. And then he'd have to leave his term early if he was to run in 2028. But I honestly think that if James Talarico ran for president in 2028, that he would win the nomination, just because he has that sort of like outsider energy. He's not part of federal politics. He comes from the Texas state legislature. And if Trump showed us anything, you don't have to have federal experience to run for president. You can still win. And in fact, it might actually be a benefit to have that sort of outsider image. And Talarico bridges the gap between being an outsider, but still understanding how government works and having actual political experience. So I think that he could take the Democratic Party by storm if he ran.
That's a good point. So speaking of outsiders, what are your thoughts on Stephen A. Smith?
Stephen A. Smith has that sort of thing with Newsom where it's like they're great communicators, they're good fighters, but I don't really think that he would govern in a way that I like. He seems to be pretty centrist on some issues, maybe even center right. And it seems like he's one of these candidates that would win based on like vibes, which I guess vibes does kind of win elections since Trump
Yeah,
won.
yeah,
But he would not be my preference. I don't think that he has like values or principles politically or like on economic issues that I really resonate with. It would be nice to see him like bully JD Vance on a debate stage, I guess. But yeah, I don't know that he'd be like my preferred actual president.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. And then I want to talk about one last person, Wes Moore. Wes
Mhm.
Moore. He announced recently that he's not going to be running for
Yeah.
president, but he was someone that I actually really liked. You know, I thought he would
Yeah.
be good. Yeah. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I'm surprised that he's not running. I'm guessing it's because he's still so young, and this might even end up being the case with AOC because there's reporting that she's considering whether she wants to run for Chuck Schumer's Senate seat or whether she wants to run for president. Some of
Mhm.
these younger stars in the Democratic Party, whether it's Wes Moore, AOC, even Buttigieg, they could run in 2036 or 2040, and they would still be younger than Biden and Trump were when they were running
Yeah,
for
yeah,
their
yeah,
first
yeah.
term.
Oh, way younger.
So, yeah, I think Wes Moore would be great. He's very well spoken, seems to be very well liked as governor. He sort of has this like aesthetic of like the modern new face of the Democratic Party, which people might say aesthetic doesn't matter, but I think it actually matters a lot. Just how you present yourself, the way you speak,
Mhm.
the vibe that people get from you. And I think Wes Moore checks those boxes really well. I'm not as intimately familiar with his policy, so I'd have to look more closely at that. But
Yeah,
he seems like a good option for like maybe the what would be next 2032 election or maybe 2036.
2036. Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah. I also think, let's say Newsom is a nominee. I think Gretchen Whitmer would be a very good VP. I think
Definitely.
she'd be really good. And then who knows, let's say 2020 to 2036, Newsom's president, then she learns under him, then 2036 to 2044, Gretchen Whitmer, and she'll be like, you know, in her 60s, so she'll have that experience.
Yeah, she's very popular in Michigan, and
Yeah,
taking advantage of that approval rating in a swing state is going to be like super, I think, pivotal to win back the Rust Belt.
exactly. Yeah, 100% agree. So the next topic I want to talk about with you, Adam, is so you know Donald Trump and RFK Jr. They linked Tylenol in pregnant women to autism back on Monday. So I want
Yeah.
to. So obviously that's not clearly backed up by any scientific studies, and that's dangerous misinformation. So I want to get your thoughts on that. So just reflect on that. Just tell me whatever you're thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just indicative of the broader attack on the hard sciences by the Trump administration, which I think is like really indicative of how bad it's getting. Because we can talk about these sort of like, I guess, political issues like taxes and immigration, where I do still think that there's blatant abuses of power and authoritarianism and just a rejection of reality. But I think if you want to just leave the political realm, it's like the hard sciences, STEM fields should never really be a topic of political debate or discussion. Like these are fields that are empirically backed. They have very rigorous standards of determining what's true and what's false and what still needs to be, validated through extensive or further research. And like having them I take this approach where RFK never went to medical school. Trump never went to medical school. Dr. Oz is a TV doctor with no actual experience that's
Yeah,
relevant to any government position. And they're taking preliminary studies that show a correlation between autism and Tylenol, not a causal link. And when you control for like a lot of these confounding variables across a lot of studies, or you compare like different siblings, you see that there's actually no real connection between autism and Tylenol when you control for other factors.
exactly.
And
I agree.
like, some people they do this thing where they defend something that Trump isn't saying. So like I'm seeing a lot of people saying like, oh, all they're saying is like be cautious when you take Tylenol. But that's already the medical guidance when you take any medication is proceed with caution. So I see a lot of sane washing happening where
Exactly.
Trump says something completely unhinged and
Right.
then his supporters try to make it sound less crazy than it actually
Right,
is
yeah,
by
yeah.
presenting something different than what he himself said. I think this is very dangerous, and it's sort of like an inflection point and a cultural moment where people are paying attention, but it's not the first case by any means where they are interfering with hard sciences. There was an NIH researcher named Kevin Hall, who was a nutrition scientist, who was looking at the effects of processed food on weight gain. And this man is a career scientist, been doing it for, I believe, over a decade, has some like extremely pivotal research that's come out in terms of nutrition. And the RFK administration didn't like what he was saying. So when the New York Times, or I believe some media company, reached out to Kevin Hall to interview him on a study, they actually edited his data and his responses to that media company. And
Wow.
then he was so frustrated that like, you guys aren't even letting me answer these questions. You're literally changing my results and changing my answers without my consent, that he had to end up resigning. And there are a lot of cases here where the NIH and the CDC, they're firing career scientists. They are canceling research. RFK canceled like $500 million in mRNA research, which could have ended up curing cancer. They're firing these scientists. The ones they don't fire get suppressed and censored and silenced and demoted. So this is a full frontal attack on science, climate science, health science, and there's no real good reason behind it. I still don't understand what the actual purpose is, except that there are genuinely conspiracy theorists and crazy people that are now in high places of power in our government.
I think the reason, actually, to answer your question, if I had to guess, is the pharmaceutical companies may be lining Trump's pockets or something like that. There's some sort of like corruption going on.
Sure.
He gets some benefit from this by saying that. Some pharmaceutical companies, they're saying, don't take Tylenol, take this instead. And then
right, because Trump did say, we're going to actually be recommending this other medication to treat autism, which there's no evidence for. Although it's going to also be the opposite, where I'm sure Tylenol could sue the Trump administration and make a lot of money from what's happened. So it seems like they are sort of picking and choosing which companies they want to help and which ones they want to throw under the bus.
Exactly. Yeah, just for personal gain.
Yeah.
So the next topic I had, it's actually a little bit of a throwback. So back in 2020, we all know what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd. He put his knee on his neck for like 10 minutes, murdered him in cold blood. So a lot of people, including myself, posted a black square for George Floyd like a week later. And, I think this raised awareness and it put pressure to, get Chauvin convicted of cold blood and murder. Otherwise, this may have been swept under the rug. So
it happens often. Yeah,
exactly. So I wanted to ask you, because I've had conversations with other people as well, and you're very good with social media. That's why I wanted to ask you, did that help well, I posted a black square and I also donated a bit. I think that it's also important to do the actions, but I'm talking about specifically the act of posting the black square. Do you think that helped or not? Or was it just performative?
I think it's sort of like neither. So I don't think it necessarily that the black square itself necessarily helped. I think it was more like the broad spectrum messaging movement in the media, in protests on the street, in people donating to a lot of these causes. So I don't think the black square itself helped. But with that being said, I don't think that posting the black square was like definitionally performative. I think most people that were posting it had good intentions and they were trying to show solidarity and support. And that's one aspect of any social movement, is you're going to have people showing support in whatever regard they can, whether it's financial support, whether it's just a post on social media. And I think it's important to see these as all being cogs in a machine and not sort of evaluating just one of them in isolation. I think unfortunately that at the moment there was a lot of public support for making reforms to how we police in this country, which does vary locality by locality and state by state. But there was like a lot of movement towards getting rid of certain types of immunity and having certain standards for use of force, and maybe introducing like more like non-lethal stun weapons to ensure that there's some more buffer between taking action that's going to end someone's life. And I think that unfortunately some of that moment was squandered in that there was this slogan of abolish the police, which I don't think was helpful. I don't think that anyone really liked that. I mean, you can look at polling across socioeconomic groups, across racial groups, and pretty uniformly, that was never a majority supported opinion to abolish the police. Now, people will say like, oh, what we mean by that is like, don't fund them more, or like move funding away to like community help centers or like drug addiction centers, whatever it may be. But I do think that the messaging there should have been that we want responsible policing, and you want to police the police and make sure that when police are acting out of line, that there's a database of that, and that they can't get a job at a different police department, and that there's some sort of pathway to holding these people accountable. And I think it's kind of unfortunate that the right was able to really capitalize on that and say like, oh, look at the George Floyd riots they talked about. And even though that was a extreme minority, like the vast majority of these protests were extremely peaceful, but the right was able to kind of capitalize on these people that were far and few between actually looting and being violent or whatever, and sort of trying to frame the Black Lives Matter movement as being that, when in reality, I think that this is a common sense move that the vast majority of Americans do support. So I would like to see going forward a more coordinated messaging campaign on this that is tied to specific policy changes in terms of immunity for police officers and like steps to hold them accountable, versus sometimes I think people that go a little bit too far on just the grievance and the virtue signaling and the sloganeering.
100% agree. Yeah, I think that we need to have, more police reform instead of like police abolition. That's important because they do play an important role in keeping communities safe. But it's important to make sure that there's good cops and get rid of, the bad apples, right?
And just by the way, like even Zoran Mamdani is someone who has picked up on this, because before he was running for mayor, he was someone who I think was tweeting something about abolish the police
Yeah,
or speaking negatively of the police. But now that he's more involved in politics and understands the reality on the ground, what people think and how policy works, he's not advocating for abolish the police. He's just
yeah,
advocating for having nonviolent public safety task forces that are showing up to address issues that don't require police force, and then having like certain mechanisms to have police oversight. And I think that's kind of like the way forward is the pathway Mamdani is talking about right now.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is, Gavin Newsom's tweets. So Gavin Newsom says, so what was funny was on Fox News, they like showed some of Gavin Newsom's tweets. They're like, this is so unprofessional. This is not what a leader does. And they're telling on themselves,
Yeah.
given that they just give Trump a pass. And I don't think they realize the irony.
Yeah,
So
they don't.
Gavin Newsom quote tweeted and he said, I'm just holding a mirror to Trump's behaviors. And so yeah, just give me your thoughts and reflections on this, and how come so many on the right, when Trump does something, it's totally fine. When someone on the left does the exact same thing, they start going crazy. So where is the consistency? What's up with this hypocrisy? What has led to this sort of, just bowing down to Trump? So
Yeah, I think we're just living in different realities in this country at this point, where if you're a Republican or you're MAGA, in your eyes, Trump and his administration are the good guys. So even if they do something that maybe on the surface doesn't seem great, they're always going to give them benefit of the doubt or say, actually, there was a good reason for it. Either Trump was joking or he didn't mean it, or I guess if he did mean it, then actually the Democrats are worse, or I'm just going to defend it. There's always a deflection. And like, the last step of that process is just defending it. So oftentimes you say, okay, Trump did this, and they say, no, he didn't. Then you say, no, here's proof he did it. And they say, okay, actually, Democrats did this other thing. And then when you bring it back to Trump, then they're like, okay, actually, now you've left me no choice. I'm just going to defend what Trump is doing. And I think when it comes specifically to like Gavin Newsom's messaging, you are seeing like when Trump does it, they have a million reasons. Oh, he's joking. He's trolling the libs. There's all these different explanations. And when Newsom does it, they're like, this is so below the office of the governor. And you see something similar with even the responses to Charlie Kirk, where like, I think Charlie Kirk was a cancer on American politics, but I'm not going to make light or make jokes about him getting shot in cold blood on a college campus. I think that's unacceptable. But I do think that there's a double standard in that when there are people that are making sort of like dark humor jokes about Charlie Kirk's death, these same people loved dark humor jokes about George Floyd's death, and they don't mind at all when Trump gives a speech last week and says, oh, next time you feel bad about Joe Biden's cancer diagnosis, just remember he's a really bad guy. If any liberal person said, oh, next time you feel bad about Charlie Kirk, remember he's a bad guy, Stephen Miller and Donald Trump would label that person a domestic terrorist the next day on Fox News. So these double standards, I think, are getting to a point where they have to be called out, because the different sort of like behavior that's considered to be acceptable on both sides is so disparate, and there's just no accountability and no self-awareness on the right.
Exactly. I 100% agree, man. It's just crazy, the double standards. I mean, you can call out the Democrats, and I think both of us identify as Democrat, and it's fine. You can call us out.
Yeah.
Call out your own side, but then to just give your own side that complete pass, that's awful. Like you have to be consistent, right?
Yeah.
So next topic, actually, I think this is gonna be a little deep. So what do we as a Muslim community need to do to better integrate into Western culture while still preserving Islamic values? So let me just give a little bit of thought. So
sure.
So the Muslim community integrating into Western culture. So think of like you have like a cup of water, okay? And a lot of these Muslim spaces, they're like oil. So if you pour oil into the water, they don't mix, right? But instead of oil, these Muslim spaces need to be like food coloring, right? So if you put the food coloring in the water, then it mixes perfectly. And there are great Muslim spaces like Mgage. I started following them recently. Awesome organization. It assimilates into Western culture while still preserving Islamic values. They endorse Harris for president. They work with non-Muslims frequently. They advocate not only for issues affecting Muslims, but non-Muslims as well. And if you have the food coloring in the water, now you have like a beautiful, colorful society. That's why it's so important. So what do we as a Muslim community need to do to better integrate into Western culture while still preserving Islamic values?
Yeah, I think we can actually even extrapolate this one level above, just in terms of like how can even different immigrant communities integrate better, and like what does that look like? Because like we're part of the sort of like South Asian community of like either our parents or grandparents or whatever
Yeah,
immigrated to the U.S. either from India or Pakistan or somewhere else, and there's a
yeah, yeah.
lot of different communities that stem from their parents came in from a different country. Now they're like the first generation of their lineage, like born in the United States. And I think you're spot on with your analogy, which is that there doesn't have to be this like we are on two different teams sort of mentality. Which, to be fair, I don't think that is super prevalent. I think that there are certain spaces that would like to be like, oh, we're distinct, we're not actually American, like America is this like other thing and we are our own thing. And then there are a lot of like voices on the far right who actually like that, and they think that same way. They're like, yeah, we are Americans and you guys are your own group, you are something alien, you are something different
Exactly. You're
than
feeding the
American.
far right narrative by
Yeah,
not.
yeah, and I think the way to respond to that is to view that like ultimately, you don't have to change your identity or give up your differences. You should stick to your cultural heritage and value that and cherish that and celebrate that. You should stick to whatever your religious convictions are and your religious values are, and still just bear in mind that we are all on the same team, whether or not we are of the same sort of like ethnic background or religious background. And that's kind of in my mind like what makes America a country worth fighting for and what makes America a great country, which is that there is ample things to criticize about this country, whether it's our foreign policy, destabilizing other nations, our inadequate fiscal policy in helping ensure people have health care and that they can sort of like climb up the socioeconomic ladder in an easy way, and our history of racism and slavery and sexism. There are so many things to criticize, but I think that the mindset has to be not that these things make America irredeemable, but the fact that we are all here living together means that these are things we have to fight and make better to make America a better country. So like there are ways to point out the flaws in America, but then also say like the whole story of this country is improving from those things. We
Exactly.
abolished slavery. We ended segregation. Does
Yeah.
that mean racism is over? No, there's still plenty of structural barriers and societal barriers. But
Right.
instead of just focusing on those and saying that that is proof that we are an irredeemable, horrible society,
Right.
that
Right.
we can look to the lessons of the past and saying, when Irish and Italian immigrants first came here, they were also considered to be these others, these like
Right.
groups
Right.
that are not
Exactly.
part of mainstream. And
Mhm.
now they're integrated pretty well into American society. I would like to see a society where like 50 years down the line, if you're a South Asian immigrant or a Hispanic immigrant or an Eastern European immigrant, whatever it may be, that you are considered no less or no more American than someone who's been here for 3 or 4 generations. Because like America is not actually a blood and soil ethnicity or nationalism. It's more of a concept or an idea that anyone who moves here and wants to live here can buy into. And you don't have to, forego what makes your culture unique. You can say that because my culture is unique and I'm part of America, that is what makes America great, that there's so much diversity here.
Yeah, exactly. And one example of this I actually really liked. So I was at the Weekend concert back in May, and I actually really liked seeing this. So then there were like 4 or 5 hijabi girls that came, and they were together. They were just like vibing to the Weekend, and I thought to myself, look, they wear hijabs. They're obviously practicing Muslims. They follow their religion, but they're going to these concerts. They're having fun. It's not like they're not drinking. They're not like bringing a boyfriend, doing PDA or anything like that. No one's saying you have to do certain things that goes against your religious convictions, but I think it's good. I think it's totally fine. Like to go listen to some music, go have fun. I don't think there's nothing haram about having fun, right? And so I think just seeing that's what I mean by integration. You can preserve your Islamic values, but you can have fun. I'm not saying if you don't like it, you don't have to do it, but
Mhm.
it was just like refreshing to see. So that is a perfect example of assimilating.
Yeah, and I think one sort of thing to expand on that is like this is really important more broadly, is like using the carrot and not the stick when you're talking about promoting your religious values, your political values, and that like if you have certain beliefs and you want to see society believe more the things that you believe, the way to do that isn't to necessarily shame people or call them out or punish them when they're not doing what you think they should be doing. It's to act as like a role model for why your way of thinking is better, and to sort of like in a positive, constructive manner draw that example for other people. And I think in like certain religious communities, sometimes there is a tendency towards saying, oh, you're not doing this, therefore you're not a good Muslim or a good Christian or a good Jew, whatever it may be, that because you're not checking these boxes that I think are important, that now you have to be shamed by the community. I think you're better off saying that, like, I'm going to embody what I think are these positive traits, and then people can see me embodying them, and then I can act as sort of like proof of concept for why other people should live that way or believe that way or think that way. And I wish, even when it comes to political issues and more broadly, that we had a more constructive approach to engaging with society, rather than, I think, a very divisive and sort of like aggressive approach that I see popping up in a lot of different subcultures, whether they're political or religious or whatever else it may be.
Right. Yeah. Very well said. And so my last question for you, Adam, is do you have ambitions to run for political office? And if so, in the near future or later on?
I don't have ambitions to run for political office. I mean, I have ambitions in the political space more broadly, but I would assume those would be more media related and activism related than governance related, because I mean, as cool as the idea of politics is, number one, it's, I think, presumptuous and sort of like self arrogant in a way for anyone who's doing political content creation to be like, oh, I could run for Senate or president. Those are extremely hard jobs to run for, and even harder jobs to carry out. And I think that there are a lot of considerations that exist when you get involved in elected politics, like having to be extremely vigilant of what you say and how you say it, and going to all these committee hearings and understanding the minutia of policy, and having a staff that I think are a lot less appealing than the image that these positions give off of just, oh, you're powerful and you get to give speeches and make laws. It's a lot more complicated and oftentimes a lot more boring than it seems on the outside.
Yeah.
So I think my main sort of lane that I'm focused on right now is spreading awareness and activism, and more involved in the media space, because I do think that actually the media plays a much bigger role, and political commentators and these sort of like mainstream thought leaders play a much bigger role in shaping the direction of the country than our elected officials do. Actually, they're oftentimes responding to those other forces.
Yeah, it's well said. But I will say one thing, Adam. So you talked about, Senate president. Those are like, larger, more, I guess, more prestigious positions. What about like local office? What about like city council or, library board or something like that? What do you consider
Yeah,
that?
those are positions that I think that, I mean, everyone should actually be getting involved in, whether or not you're doing something political on social media. I mean, showing up to your city council hearings and getting involved in local elections, I think is of the utmost importance, because like a lot of the changes that are going to affect you in your day-to-day life are going to be decided not by the federal level or even the state level. They're going to be decided by the local level, whether it's like, where are we going to put this stop sign or this traffic light, or like what sorts of programs are your public schools going to offer after school. You can actually have a pretty big impact on those, especially when you consider that like most people don't show up to city council hearings. So like if you're one of the few that does show up, you have a lot of power to make an influence and a change on what's going on there. So in that regard, yeah, I'm sure I'd like to get involved more in, like, especially I think when it comes to like zoning laws. I think like we have a huge problem in this country with housing, where we're not building enough housing, and that's causing an increase in the cost of housing. That's one thing that you change not through the presidency or the Senate or the U.S. Congress. You change it through actually going to your city council meetings and talking to your zoning boards, and sort of like spreading awareness in your local community for like, hey, we should be building more apartment complexes, not more single family homes, for example.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's well said. That's well said. Yeah, for me, it's like I'm strongly considering in 2028 to potentially run for city council. I'm thinking about that. I would be like an outsider to politics, but I've seen outsiders do it. For me, I think you definitely know more substance right now. For me, it's like a lot of my information that I know about politics is just me watching stuff on YouTube, reading. It's just something that's interesting to me. I actually was like very apolitical. So I graduated high school in 2016. Until 2016, until high school, I didn't know like anything about politics. I barely knew. I just knew, okay, Obama beat Romney, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And then, but when Trump won, I was like, I have to get more involved. So this was my freshman year of college, 2016. I'm like, I have to know more. And then that summer of 2018, the midterms, I started doing a lot of research and like really understanding how do these work and stuff. And then and AOC won that election. And, I'm starting to see, well, I'm not saying AOC is an outsider, but I'm saying that, just like outside voices that aren't typical politicians. I think that's important for them to run and to not be like part of the corrupt establishment and stuff like that, or like the career politicians. So yeah, I'm strongly considering in 2028 if there's an opportunity just to learn and to run. And then if I like that, then maybe progress to like, Michigan State rep, Michigan State senator. I mean, that's way far ahead, but
Sure.
we'll see. But yeah, I'm strongly considering 2028 city council, and we'll see.
I think it's a great idea. And I think more people should have the mindset just in general of like, even if you don't want to run for something, you can just show up to a city council meeting and just see what they're talking about and just express your opinion. And then if you do want to have like a more decision-making role, then you should run for these local positions. And I totally agree that like you shouldn't have a political system that only attracts career politicians in a sense where like, and this is, I think, actually an argument for why I think that, elected office should actually be a much better paying job, because oftentimes what you see is that the only people who enter politics are people who don't need the money and they're already wealthy from outside sources, and then they get involved in politics. And just normal everyday people who just need to make a salary to get by, like 99% of people, they're not getting involved in politics because they don't have the time to do it with their work, and the actual incentive of getting involved is like not really always there in terms of attention or salary, whatever else it may be. And I think like you do want to see more community members running for city council, and then more city council members running for state rep, and then more state rep members running for federal positions. Like I would love to see a future where you have public school teachers and like firefighters or college professors running for Michigan State rep, and then running for US Senate or like US House, and like sort of working their way up the ladder from actual grassroots community oriented positions where they understand how things work, what the community is feeling, rather than a lot of times these people who are coming from, and it's fine to come from the business community and be wealthy. That's not an issue. But I'd like to see more representation from other walks of life and more like average people who are not part of these sort of like elite circles, and sort of leveraging that to get into positions of power.
So you said that very well, Adam. So yeah, that's it for me with my questions. So is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience?
I mean, I guess just that I would like people to be paying attention to what's going on. I think it's like that we have an issue where every election ever is always the biggest deal ever. And then people sort of start thinking that it's like this boy who cried wolf thing, where like now when they hear someone saying that Trump is an authoritarian and that like the Constitution is under threat and that like we don't know for sure whether there's going to be an election in 2028. Those are real serious problems. That there's plans that have been drafted up that anyone can go online and read, PDFs, executive orders that were drafted that explain step by step how to steal an election, how to federalize the National Guard, send them into polling places, seize voting machines, and then change the results. This is all out there in public. This is a very real possibility. And I think the only way to stop this from happening is for people who maybe normally don't pay attention to politics to really look at what's happening and understand the stakes of like, if you want to live in a country with rule of law and basic law and order and justice and fairness to some extent, at least, you have to be involved in paying attention to what's happening, because by the time a lot of people realize what's happening, I'm scared it's going to be like a little bit too late.
Yeah. Hopefully, people can really see what's going on and just get involved. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Well, Adam, thank you so much for your time, and
Thanks for having
good
me.
luck. Yeah, and good luck with your future endeavors and all the social media content creation that you do. And
Thank you.
I'm excited to see more of what you put out.
For sure.
You're doing a great job. Yeah. So thank you for your time, Adam.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah.